So, I would like you to welcome to the second plenary panel on a very easy and straightforward topic, which is the future of NATO. It's for me a big pleasure and an honor to be here and to moderate this panel. I think it's a topic that is particularly relevant in that region, and where the notion of NATO being the life assurance of many countries is particularly relevant. So we're trying to understand a bit better and have some ideas about how NATO's future might look like, although I tend to think that 100 years is a lot of time to predict the future. NATO has certainly been revitalized since 2014, but we all know it's not all sunshine and roses. This is what we heard already in the first panel. Challenges come from the outside, be it Russia or in the south, but they increasingly come also from the inside. Talking about coherence and leadership, or shall I say a lack of leadership, and particularly talking about the inner European frictions and the new modus of the transatlantic relations. That actually means talking about the future of NATO means talking about the future of the transatlantic relationship, but also about the future of Europe. I'm hence particularly pleased to have four excellent panelists here to help me discuss those issues. And I hope that we will have 1.5 hours, a bit less maybe, to not shy away from the difficult and thorny questions and have some bright ideas of how the next years might look like. So let me briefly introduce the panel. We have first Minister Raimunds Bergmanis, Minister of Defense of Latvia since 2015. Very warm welcome. We have then Minister Raimundas Karoblis, Minister of National Defense of Lithuania. A very warm welcome. Then we have Professor Julian Lindley-French, security and defense expert, very well known in the regions, and a particularly thank to stepping in on a very short notice. And we have General Ben Hodges. I think I don't need to introduce him in that panel, but obviously commander of US Army in Europe until last year. I would like you to have very brief statements, say 7, maximum 10 minutes, so to give us some main ideas. Then I would like to discuss a little bit with you on the panel and then open the debate to the floor. Minister Bergmanis, would you like to start, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true pleasure to be here in such a wonderful company. Nowadays, it is quite hard to predict what will happen today, much more after 100 years, but I will give it my shot. 100 years ago, Latvia announced its independence for the first time. I don't know how exactly our ancestors had imagined the future of the young Latvia, but one thing is certain: we had a dream for freedom and rule of law. That is a base of democratic values. Already back then, when we aspired to be a part of Western world in order to build a safe, prosperous and peaceful future for our nation. However, we didn't see coming the tremendously harsh turns of history, which brought pain, spilled blood, repressions, oppressions, and other hardships of our people. But here we are today, being a part of the strongest and most successful military alliance in the world. Similarly, I believe it's near impossible to predict where will the tides of future bring us and what will happen after 100 years. However, I think also here one thing is certain: the fundamental values we believe in and are ready to protect, those have united us, and I am convinced will keep us together in the future. I believe the teaching of Chinese military master Sun Tzu have also survived the tides of history and very relevant today. One of the great lessons he gives is to rely not on the likelihood of the enemies not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him. Not on the chance of enemy not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. I think there is no better advice that could be given to NATO political and military leaders to ensure that NATO remains strong and capable for the next 100 years. The current security environment has become highly complex, and the challenges are still evolving. In the 21st century, we remain the witness of provocative military activities, outrages, terrorist attack, deliberate deception, targeted information campaigns, unpredictably cyber attacks and manipulation. The scale of these challenges is enormous. As put together, they question our existing ways of life, democratic values, principles, and historical ways of cooperation. The good thing is that NATO is one of the right paths to adapt to these challenges. This ability to adjust and evolve, along with the changing global environment, is one of the key factors of alliance endurance. One can even say that threats come and go, but NATO stays. In this regard, the actual question, from my perspective as the Minister of Defense of Latvia, would be, can Baltic states count on NATO for the next years? Just to be clear, Latvia counts on NATO today, tomorrow, and in the long run. However, there are areas that can be improved, and I have no doubts about positive results. An excellent example is the enhanced foreign presence, which proves that alliance can be very quick and effective in implementing decisions. In Latvia's case, we are so proud and happy to host Canadian-led battle group. So, what else we need to do? We, collectively, as an alliance, have to continue strengthening deterrence and at the same time building defense. We need to continue developing and improving our capabilities, forces, plans, and procedures in a manner that no one ever dares to doubt our resolve. We want to avoid possible conflicts at all costs. That's why it is important to deter. And there is no better deterrence than demonstrating that we have what it takes to win and defeat anyone who dares to attack us. To ensure this, it is crucial that NATO core tasks remain intact and the collective defense is at the heart of the alliance. NATO needs to sustain adequate early warning and be able to make quick decisions. We need to ensure superiority through all NATO territory in all domains. We need to create conditions that enable Allied forces to move as quickly as possible across NATO territory. This includes solutions for ensuring freedom of action and movement within contested environments, as well as countering effects of cyber attacks and electronic warfare. And we need to prepare ourselves for all this through planning and exercise. On national level, we have to invest more in our own security. The challenges to security have become more sophisticated. And if we do not attempt to address them, then we have already lost. At the same time, defense investment should not be blind militarization. It has to be smart development of capabilities to ensure that we have what it takes to respond to the existing threat environment and that we have made our position unassailable. We need to remind ourselves that resources must follow our principles. The cost might be high, but giving up our principles would cost us even more. For example, just in 4 years, Latvia has gone from 0.9% to 2% of defense spending. It is possible. Preserving peace without appropriate investment in defense is an illusion. Strong military was and will continue to be an integral part of guaranteeing the freedom of any nation. On an individual level, we need to start creating a mindset where every single member of the society is ready and willing to devote own efforts in defending homeland. In Latvia, we have started the process of creating a comprehensive defensive system, incorporating all elements of state, starting with governmental institutions, to every single member of our society in order to improve our resilience against crisis, wherever they might be coming from. This initiative perfectly complements our commitment to NATO, as we are addressing the internal readiness and capacity of our nation. Strong and willing citizens constitute a strong and willing nation. Strong and willing nation adds to the power of the alliance. Speaking of the future reliability of NATO, I have to mention our strategic partner, the United States. For many decades, the United States have been leading the way in ensuring peace and security around the world. And from Latvia's defense perspective, we would like to see this trend continuing. The presence of the United States in Europe, and particularly Baltic states, is a crucial element for true deterrence. Europe, of course, needs to pick up the piece on its own defense. Permanent structured cooperation and European Defence Fund are good initiatives to complement our defence effort, for which NATO should remain as the main platform. I believe all these efforts put together create a solid base for an unassailable position Senju talked about. In my mind, all these efforts will help us to avoid potential future conflicts. It is true that there is no shortage of work to be done or responsibilities to bear, but it is our duty to ensure a bright and peaceful future for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. On a final note, I will point out of the challenges we face today are actual attempts at attacking our values and way of life. Terrorists rudely use our freedom and openness in attempts to force us to turn our back on the wonderful liberties of democracy. And Russia is trying to create a divide between us as allies and split within our societies, so that we turn on each other. However, I firmly believe that when hearts and minds are guided by the same values, any and all obstacles can be overcome. To sum up, my short answer to the question posed by this panel is, yes, we can count on NATO for the next 100 years, and even more, if we remain united and willing to invest in our defense. There is no other possibility, because we are NATO, and we ourselves are ones who build it. If we don't believe in NATO after 100 years, we don't believe in ourselves. It is value that unites 29 nations. I believe NATO family has what it takes to stay the strongest and most successful alliance in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, to give that rather positive outlook. And I retain that sentences, threats come and go, but NATO stays. I think we might come back to that in the debate, because I might be a bit more skeptical about that one. Minister Karoblis, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to participate in this conference, in this panel, and thanks also for Raymond, and thanks for this, your statement, your views. I can really subscribe by 100% what you said. The position is really the same as it is. For us, the NATO and NATO's efficiency is of the existential importance. We are members of the two most important organizations of NATO and EU, both of them of the existential importance. And we very much expect that also others understand that it's really important not only for us, but also for our alliance, and it will survive and will be even more efficient than now. Regarding 100 years prognosis, well, I prefer a little bit shorter timing for the planning, but on the other hand, of course, it is possible to make some prognosis regarding the need of NATO and the actions of NATO. First of all, next year we will celebrate 70 years from the establishment of NATO. And 40 years was about NATO's role in the Cold War. And it's proved that reliable defense alliance in Europe. It proved it during this year. And first of all, because of the NATO, Europe did not have the war during this 40 years. Then we have another period, approximately of 20, let's say, years, where majority of the Western societies thought that we're looking through the rosy glasses, I would say. So it was the rays of the optimism that everything could be really perfect. We will not have problems. First of all, of course, with conventional threats, and the alliance moved to the, let's say, other functions than mostly than defense alliance. Several reforms. But it's clear that unfortunately the world will not become perfect. Now, with Russia's stance, aggression in Ukraine, but not only its interventions in Syria and elsewhere, attempts to regain the influence over the world 360 degrees, we show that we already have conventional threats. But also we have other threats which may be way lesser manner. So 40 years ago, it's the fight with terrorism, which also now the domain of NATO. Technological challenges. So of course the propaganda was used as a tool also previously, but with new technological developments, we have of course new challenges here. Cyber, of course, was absolutely new domain also of NATO, and of course with the absence of perfectionism of the world, it's naturally that NATO is needed, and unfortunately it will be needed for the next 100 years. What's about the future and the methods? I think that NATO should continue to be on 4 principles, or also there are also challenges. The first of all, so-called 3C, so the cash, capabilities, and contributions. Well, unfortunately, preparation for defense is expensive. And without the financement, without the contributions, without capabilities, it's impossible to deal. And, well, the example of Lithuania was also. So still in the 10 years ago, little bit, our financement of the defense was 0.77. We realized, our politicians, that we need to be really stronger, to be serious about that. And during 4 years, we increased 4 times the defense financement. And of course, we're going further. Burden sharing in this respect also important. It's really not the function of United States and frontier countries, but also this is task for Europe. And really, we need to find the adequate solution to burden sharing. Secondly, shared threat assessment. Also, we need to look jointly to that. We need to be common approach. Well, this also 360 degrees is working. and we, I think, getting more or less the understanding, but also here we need to be realistic, look to the objectively to the threats, but not sometimes through political angles. If intelligence is saying that the tanks, vessels, ships, etc., are there and these are dangerous, really very big risks, it means that it is, but it's possible to say they can't be there because it can't be there politically. Third issue, military readiness and effective deterrence. We very much expect, yes, it's defensive alliance, but the deterrence will work, and of course that any adversary will not be, of course, touch, of course, NATO. But for that also, the level of deterrence is equal to the readiness of defense. And here, not about the weaponry systems, but also about the other issues, like the arrival of the troops to specific places, of course, where the crises are, and other issues which we have. The readiness as such, we very welcome the summit decision regarding the readiness of 30 battalions, 30 wings of aviation, 30 ships, readiness during 30 days. It's very important. But on the other hand, Russia's readiness, unfortunately, is significantly higher, but we expect that it's, for NATO, it's the first step. Fourth issue is shared values. Of course, it's the basis for NATO. Sometimes we understand it differently, but, well, on the other hand, so the beauty that we can reach the agreement when consensus, when it's necessary. And first of all, it was 11th of September. Then, of course, with this dangerous Wales summit, Warsaw Summit, and even Brussels Summit, which also really shows I could be really also optimistic for that. So with that, I very much believe that NATO will not only survive, but will be even stronger ally, and what was done during from 2014 till now, it's really very, very positive, covering everything, so that the security stress 360 degrees. Yes, what we have already now in our region, Raymond's already also mentioned, so the EFP and also measures which we have, really very important guarantee for the deterrence, but also we need quite a lot to do. Reinforcement strategy, what we're still working. It means that which troops and when, during which time could arrive to us in case of crisis, enable us. It means air defense, first of all, maritime defense. They are certain with the Warsaw Summit, and really we need to have the solutions. But nevertheless, I remain optimistic. But on the other hand, and this issue was touched during the first session, so if the nations which could, subject to the Iraq attack, will not be prepared to defend ourselves, and if our armed forces will not be prepared ourselves, so, well, frankly speaking, nobody will help us. Allies will not help. And really the resilience of society, strength of societies, really it's most, and the strength of the armed forces is really most important. But from our side, I think that the same is for all Baltics, is in our case the situation of 1940 should not repeat it and will not be repeated, even in the worst case scenario. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for making very clearly the case for the four challenges or principles, so the burden sharing, threat assessment, readiness, and shared values. I'm turning to you now, Julian. You have been following those topics for quite a long while, which gives you this kind of long-term perspective. Are there any lessons that should be particularly applied, or what would your particular advice be for the future?
Thank you, Claudia, and Ministers, thank you, Ben. Great to share a panel with you. Great honour to be here back at the Riga conference. Look, I don't really care if the alliance survives another 100 years. What really matters to me is elections take place in Latvia and the other Baltic states for 100 years, because that's freedom. And talking about freedom is cheap. Defending freedom is expensive. And in my brief intervention, having heard the stirring and very correct words of my ministerial colleagues, I'm going to focus on the how questions. You know, what I think, how NATO must be transformed to ensure that freedom is assured, that any threat to it is deterred. First, we have to build capacity. We have to ensure that the enhanced and tailored forward presence are reinforced by a powerful mobile follow-on capability, and that means more deployable European, notice to move fast forces, I call them, more readiness, more command and structure, force structure reform. The 430s, which is a great initiative, is a first step, but we have a long way to go. Let's be clear about that. Second, we must all fully commit to NATO adaptation. We must mean what we say at summits. The adaptation agenda is an extensive one, but it is necessary. But particularly where it concerns the coming revolution in military technology. I think many Europeans are in denial what's coming over the horizon at us if we don't get involved in the future shape of future war. And talk war, because we are back in the business of war. 3, develop a NATO 4D defence concept, from indicators to interdiction, disinformation, disruption, destabilisation and destruction, not to mention a 5th D, deception. They're all part of the new continuum of warfare in the 21st century, and some would argue it's a form of warfare that's already being used. Right now, 4, create an end state, a meaning, a purpose for the defence investment pledge. 2% Euro baseline GDP on defence by 2024, of which critically 20% on new equipment. I want to go further. That Europeans, we Europeans, provide 50% of all the forces committed to the defence of Europe by 2030. Follow on from the DIP, the DIP, and reach a peak of having 50% assured for the defence of Europe. 5, enhance military mobility. Ben's done some great work on promoting this. But we need enhanced military mobility by investing in military-hardened road, rail and communications infrastructure, and to remove all legal and military impediments to the rapid movement of forces across Europe in an emergency. Absolutely crucial to deterrence. 6, craft a future war strategy at the heart of defence and deterrence to modernise Article 5 itself. That includes hybrid war, hyper war and cyber war, because that is the way that future war will be fought, and how we have to conceive of the collective defence that we mount. 7, design high-end, deployable European forces that can prevail across the 7 domains of future war: air, sea, land, cyber, space, information and knowledge. Our people are our comparative advantage. We have a fantastic network of centres of excellence, of defence education institutions across Europe. Let's enable it to prepare mission command success of the future European force. The very process of doing this is an act of deterrence, without it being an act per se that anyone could interpret as aggression. 8, no more ever-decreasing PESCOs. I wrote my PhD many years ago on the future of European security and defence, and I read the last chapter the other day, and you know that Bill Murray film, Groundhog Day? It kind of felt like being in that. We just put different acronyms on the same old process. We must better align immediately the current PESCO projects, all 34 of them, to meet the actual identified EU and NATO military shortfalls. That's a step that we can take right now, cost-effectively and affordably. 9, actually mean what we Europeans say and be clear about it. Clarify what level of ambition we really have when we talk about European strategic autonomy. What do we really mean by this? No more political smoke and mirrors. It's getting too late. We need to realign our ambition with reality, because that will be crucial to be maintaining the credibility not just of the EU, but of the alliance. 11, and this worries me, Claudia, we've got to stop talking about a 360-degree alliance when we haven't got one. We've got to close the increasingly north, east, south, and at times, listening to President Trump, gap to the west. We need a comprehensive understanding of the nature of the risks and the threats and the priorities they generate, and how the resources and forces are designed to meet them in an emergency, possibly in parallel. You know, my nightmare is a major crisis in Asia-Pacific, with the Middle East in turmoil, with US forces locked down in dealing with this major crisis in Asia-Pacific, and we Europeans faced with an opportunistic Russia at a moment of maximum weakness. These are very realistic sets of scenarios, and we have to address reality if we are to prepare a sound defence. 12, adding on to that, let's consider properly the implications of Vostok 18, a potential Russo-Chinese alliance. What does it mean for US force levels and force posture? What about our own forces in Europe in the event of a major crisis like that? 13, and I'm moving towards the end, Claudia, but I want to get through this because I think it's an important practical agenda. We should start a debate within the alliance about deterrence, but particularly about the relationship between dissuasion, deterrence by denial, and preemption. Because I'm not sure when I talk to leaders and commanders around the alliance, we actually talk the same language when we talk about deterrence. We talk about deterrence and defence, but I often think we might mean something else. 14, many political leaders, particularly in Western Europe, not here, present company clearly accepted, they are living a kind of virtual 10-year rule. I see it in my own country, the UK. The 10-year rule was instigated in 1919 by the British at the end of the First World War, and it was a rule by which Britain could assume that it would not be involved in a major war in Europe for at least another 10 years. In October 1932, Britain ended it and began the massive rearmament programs in 1934, before World War II. But when I talk to many Western European politicians, they have this virtual 10-year rule. They just don't believe a major war is possible in Europe. Maybe it isn't, but I can tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, it's a damn sight more possible than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And unless our political classes face up to that, then we in this room can do nothing. There has to be political buy-in. So politicians, end your 10 years rule. And Claudia, one for you. Germans. Dear Germans.
I'm listening.
Pull your bloody fingers out over defence. I mean, really. I mean, the state of the Bundeswehr is pitiful. And it's not good enough. Germany is a leader. We need German leadership in Europe. And nobody in their right mind is scared about modern Germany's claim to leadership in Europe. One of my favourite authors is a guy called L.P. Hartley. He wrote a brilliant novel called The Go-Between in the 1960s. And the book starts with a line. The past is another country. They do things differently there. So, at times with respect, and this genuine respect, I'm part of a high-level US-German group called the Loisach Group. It's looking at the US-German relationship. It's an essential relationship, but it certainly ain't special, especially right now. But unless Europe can build a much greater contribution to its own defence, the United States, with the best will in the world, given the pressures on them, cannot provide a transatlantic security guarantee even if they so wish, because the pressures on the Americans are going to get worse. And there can be no serious European pillar of defence and security, a serious European pillar within NATO, or indeed a strategically autonomous capability, unless Germany ups its defence game massively. It's simple truism, a simple reality. Now, I'll finish. I've avoided the B word thus far, Brexit. It is true that my nuclear-armed, advanced deployable country is at the moment on the naughty step of Europe. I may have been one of the guys who foresaw it and wrote about it quite a few years ago, and it was certainly me who invented the phrase Hotel California Brexit. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. But the bottom line is, we need to get through Brexit and still be friends. And I'm worried at some of the toxicity of the Brexit debate at a high level. Because if this continues, it will impact upon the alliance. There is life after Brexit, believe me. I hope there's life after Brexit. I need there to be life after Brexit. But what matters is that Britain is going nowhere. Britain is a major military power at the core of the alliance, and I desperately hope with a very close relationship with the EU in future. Because then we Europeans can stop spending our time fighting within the anthill that is Europe and start looking out to the wider world. And what's happening in Asia Pacific, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in America, and realize if we really want to ensure that elections take place a century from now in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, it ultimately comes down to not to my great friends like Ben, but to we Europeans. It's our call. It's our call that we remain free, but it's a call we finally have to make now. Stop talking about freedom. Let's start defending it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You made a wonderful to-do list, but I think the kind of main pattern was it all boils down to freedom matters, and Europeans defending it, whether we actually are willing to put something behind what we did here in Europe, and whether we are willing to step in to defend that. Yep. Ben, the last speaker, you have the terrific advantage that you have seen all those topics from the inside in the military and from the outside, and particularly now you are free to speak. So I'm looking very much forward to your comments and your advice, the advice you would give us Europeans, what we should do to assure NATO's future.
Thanks, Claudia. I think the reason that I'm retired and free to speak now is because when I was in the Army, I always felt free to speak. So I'm going to touch on 3 topics and would welcome questions or challenges here from this incredible group that's assembled. The first one will be affirming U.S. commitment to the alliance and to Europe. The second one is going to be what the alliance needs to do to achieve coherence in defense, particularly along its eastern flank from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea. And then the third topic, burden sharing, 2%. I think it's time for a more sophisticated approach to what that actually means. So U.S. commitment to NATO and Europe. Watch what we do, not what we say. Everything that the Obama administration promised at the NATO summit in Warsaw in 2016 has been delivered under the Trump administration. Rotational forces, preposition equipment, rotational aviation brigade, increased exercises. The amount of money that the Congress has appropriated under what was European Reassurance Initiative is now European Deterrence Initiative has increased 3 consecutive years in a row. 98 senators voted before the Brussels summit to affirm America's commitment to the alliance. It's impossible to get 98 senators to agree on almost anything. The increased missile defense, we have Aegis Ashore in Romania and being built in Poland. The United States has provided javelins under this administration, provided javelins in Georgia and Ukraine, something that the previous administration didn't do. And then finally, the administration just announced about a month ago the increase of 1,500 American soldiers going to Germany, a fires brigade with 2 multiple launch rocket system battalions and an air defense battalions, which were 2 of the top 5 priorities that we've always had in U.S. Army Europe. So the administration has addressed 2 of those top 5 already. That's going into Germany. So while it's not perfect and it's not enough, every one of those things is an indicator of commitment to NATO and to Europe. And it matters to us because the economic prosperity of the United States is directly linked to economic prosperity and security in Europe. The economic relationship between North America and the EU is about 5 times more than it is anywhere else in the world. So if not one European country spent a single euro on defense, it's still necessary for us. Also, we don't do anything by ourselves anymore. We don't have the capacity to do anything by ourselves anymore, exactly as Julian talked about. And all of our best and most reliable allies come from Europe, as well as Canada and Australia. So we need the allies. So that's why we are always going to be invested here. And then finally, you know, the National Defense Strategy, recently published by Secretary Mattis, talks about alliance partners and access. Ramstein, Germany, the world's largest aircraft carrier, unsinkable. Without the access that Germany gives the United States, we could not carry out our own strategy, not just in Europe, but also in Africa and in the Middle East. Turkey, Incirlik Air Base, is a Turkish air base. Without Turkey, our NATO ally, allowing us to fly out of Incirlik, we would not be able to do anything in Syria, certainly not as much as what we're trying to do right now. So the access that our allies in Italy give us, Greece, Germany, other countries that allow us to train, to fly, to live, is necessary. It's an essential part of our national defense strategy. So the alliance, the United States, is always going to be committed. Do I wish the president would not say some things that he does? Of course, because it confuses people. But when the United States is serious about something, it puts money on it, and it puts people on it, and that's usually soldiers, and they're all around you. We do have permanent basing in Latvia, by the way, Minister. It's Ambassador Pettit. She's equal to an infantry battalion at least, and so you can be sure that she's always going to be here. The second topic, coherence in NATO's eastern flank. Back at the Warsaw Summit, the alliance took an important step with the deployment of the enhanced forward presence battle groups, and how critical it was that Germany was the first nation to step forward and say, we will lead an enhanced forward presence battle group, and we will go to Lithuania. And the Germans were the first unit to deploy faster than anybody else. How powerful that Germany stepped forward and did that, because that put pressure on everybody else. And it was important to have a continental European country be a part of this as well. And so that brought along everybody. And the fact that you had 28 nations at this summit that all said that we're willing to do this, this is important. I mean, Russia, you actually didn't get a peep out of them with the deployment of the EFP battle groups, comparatively speaking, because of the cohesion of the alliance. So this was an important step, just like the creation of the VJTF, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, the creation of the NFIU, the NATO Force Integration Unit. By the way, the NFIU in Lithuania, Minister, of all of them, probably has set the pace for everybody else. It's a great model for everybody to follow. But then the Black Sea, the alliance established something called tailored forward presence, which kind of left you wanting a little bit more. That was not satisfactory. And I actually believe that the Black Sea is where the Russians are really going to challenge. The Black Sea is strategically important for Russia. It's the launching pad for Russia into Syria, into the Eastern Mediterranean. So we've got to figure out a way within the confines of the Montreux Convention, respecting the Montreux Convention. How do we protect 3 allies, as well as Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, as well as 3 partners, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia? And Russia has demonstrated in the Sea of Azov that they have total disregard for the law, or they twist it, as my friend Mark Voyager talks about, in using lawfare as another tool in their toolbox. I think that we've got to figure out a way in the alliance to increase our ability to counter Russian aggression, to deter them from what they're doing there now. The idea that was floated, pardon the pun, that Jim Townsend put forth a while back, the idea of a Black Sea flotilla that brought together the maritime capabilities of the allies and partners that are there. And really, Romania has got to step forward and do this because Turkey is so distracted to their south right now. And I think it's time for Romania, for the alliance to support Romania. I think I would recommend a 3-star headquarters in Romania that would be responsible for the Black Sea region, much the way that Multinational Corps Northeast is responsible for the Baltic region and Poland. This would provide an oversight that would port back to probably Joint Force Command Naples. That would be my recommendation. I think looking for ways to improve intelligence sharing inside the Black Sea region as well as the Baltic region is important. We did the best I've ever seen us do during the Zapad exercise, but that was a surge. That needs to be the norm. And I think it's more than just satellites and military technical means. It has to be the full range of capabilities. I visited the excellent Stratcom Center of Excellence this morning here in Riga, and Yanis Sars and his team are doing a great job there. And they showed me some work that they're doing with the digital forensics that offer a whole new way to pay attention to what potential attacker, right, Russia, is doing, because they will not do us a favor of lining up a bunch of T-72 tanks. That would be easy. I mean, the world's greatest Air Force would end it in the first day, but instead it's going to be something that will be very difficult to recognize. And so the work that the Stratcom Center of Excellence is doing here, I think offers a good way ahead to think about all the different ways, but it needs to be brought together. And I think the alliance has got to figure out how to do that. I think that air policing needs to be converted to air defense, and that means not just a mission profile change, but rules of engagement. And this is the key part, the rules of engagement. And right now, there are certain countries in the alliance that are blocking this because they do not want the SACEUR to have that much authority. That's what it boils down to. So I think we got to be serious about air defense. Otherwise, you're going to have Russian planes violating the airspace of allies routinely because they're not worried about it. They're going to be reported like a parking ticket. Instead, we need to have something with some teeth in it. And air defense is not just Patriots and Avengers or Mistrals. It's also the combined air forces of the alliance. I think the alliance took a huge step, and it was lost in all the noise in Brussels with all the focus on 2%. Our great alliance has continued to adapt, as they demonstrated with the deployment of the EFP Battle Group, an announcement that came out in Brussels of the Joint Sustainment and Enabling Command, one of 2 new commands that the alliance created specifically to speed up reinforcement, to receive incoming forces from all over Western Europe and get them to where they're needed. This new headquarters in Ulm, another example of German leadership, Germany stepping forward to be the host for this and the framework nation for this headquarters, which is really going to be important. And I think they are going to help us, along with the European Union, improve military mobility, which is exactly as Julian said. If we cannot move as fast or faster than Russian Federation forces, then I think the risk of Russia making a terrible miscalculation that they could get away with a quick strike goes up. I mean, they're not worried about being loved. They just want to be feared and respected. And so anybody that thinks that they would never do that we're going to end up with another a Crimea type situation. There's a reason Sweden put troops back on Gotland Island. I mean, Sweden put troops back on Gotland Island because they know that Russia could grab Gotland Island in a quick strike. And then they've dramatically increased their A2AD capability in the Baltic Sea even more than what they already have in Kaliningrad. Third topic or issue is burden sharing. I think it has to be, you have to talk about it. And every president since President Truman has said, allies, you need to do more. You have to do more. But I think the way that the discussion currently happens, the focus just on 2%, is not helpful. To be fair, the nations represented up here were already increasing their defense spending since the Wales Summit. So who gets the credit for increasing spending is not important. My father used to say, there's no end to the good a man can do if he doesn't care who gets the credit. What matters is that nations are, in fact, realizing the threat and are taking the steps that need to be taken, all the nations in NATO. But, you know, there are a couple of nations that are 2%ers that actually do not have capability that the alliance needs, or they are actually losing some capabilities despite being 2%ers. So I'm not against 2%. I'm completely against 2% being the only metric that matters. Now, the 20% of the 2%, and I barely passed math when I was a cadet, so I'm at the top end right now, but 20% of 2%, that's important because that does ensure modernization. But if the rest of your 2% is spent on pensions or personnel costs, or just one or two pieces of high-end equipment, and yet you have no other capability, I'm not sure that 2% is the right metric. There is some discussion, the minister mentioned it earlier, the idea of the 3 C's, not the 3 C's as in Adriatic, Black, and Baltic Sea, but contributions, capabilities, and cash. Focus on capabilities, what the alliance needs. And right now, what the alliance needs is not more German tanks, it needs more German trains. We cannot move more than 1 brigade in all of Europe right now. 1 brigade at a time is all that Deutsche Bahn can move. That's it. And if there's a crisis, there are going to be multiple brigades plus enablers all trying to get those trains to get where they have to go. So why don't we figure out a way to incentivize countries to put more money into infrastructure? Now, I realize that's a slippery slope because you would have to really define what that means. And I think it has to be something with demonstrable military value. Rail capacity, railroads. You know, the Suwalki Corridor, my organization, SIPA, did a study recently with the help of the Lithuanian and Polish Ministries of Defense on how to protect that Suwalki Corridor, that little area between Kaliningrad and Belarus. There's 1 railroad. That's it. 1 railroad that goes up into, from Poland up into the Baltic countries, which all of you know about. And of course, it's the wrong gauge, which is going to slow us down then, because you have to change once you get into Lithuania. There's 1 highway that can sustain heavy military traffic. 1 highway. And there are more lakes in North Poland than there are in all of Minnesota. So the bridge, infrastructure, the highways, the rail has got to be improved for us to have deterrence, to be able to move quickly. And by the way, this is all going to happen in peacetime conditions because no elected official is going to want to do something that looks like escalation or provocation. So all the EU road laws are not going to be waived. And Deutsche Bahn is not going to stop moving Audis and Mercedes in order to start moving Leopards and Abrams. So we're going to be competing in peacetime conditions, and we're going to have to move a long distance and move a lot of equipment real fast in order to prevent the Russians to signal that we see what you're doing, do not make a terrible mistake. So this military mobility is really about giving our political leaders some options. And then the final thing on the burden sharing, I think protecting European citizens. We need missile defense. Germany and the Netherlands both have Patriot. Buy more. It requires 0 research. Buy more. And protect European citizens and protect these important facilities that the alliance is going to need. Seaports like Klaipeda and Riga and Tallinn, Gdansk, Szczecin, as well as ports back in Germany and the Netherlands. Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you very much.
Fred.
I would like to ask 1 question to all of you. And I would like to keep the answers short so we can take the other participants in. I have to admit, I wasn't really surprised that you all agreed that NATO is important. I expected that somehow. But it might be even more necessary to have it and to strengthen it. I think there's 1 elephant in the room, and that's the changing transatlantic relationships. Because all the scenarios you put on the table, all the ideas, build upon that more or less this transatlantic link will remain as it is. And I tend to think that the current differences, or put it in a diplomatic way, the current challenges in the transatlantic relationships are a long-term structural problem. Yeah. That started before Trump, and that is very likely to continue after Trump. And if you think of the transatlantic relationship as a kind of architecture with various pillars, all pillars are affected. We have different opinions when it comes to foreign policy. Think of Iran. We have different opinions on climate change. We have different opinions on trade, whether it be rather protectionist, rather free trade. And there seem to be sometimes different approaches in defense, and to what extent alliances and agreements matter, or maybe just deals or other things with dictators matter. So if that analysis is right, and we have a structural issue here that goes on the very basis of our relationship, then the question is how this is going to continue. Then this not on all extent pleasant Brussels summit was not an exception, but just the proof after the G7 summit that something is rotten in the state of transatlantic relationships. And although I'm convinced, and I would say we need the Americans here, because otherwise NATO and defense in Europe is doomed. But in the end, it's the US and the Americans who decide whether they want to stay committed in Europe. So we might call for them as much as we want, but a certain European capacity to act might be forced upon us Europeans, whether we like it or not. And in all the scenarios we talked about, you have been, if I might say, a bit shy on that element if Big Brother is not longer willing to play with it. And there comes in this idea of strategic autonomy, not something I'm very fond of. I think the term is very fuzzy and not very helpful. But what would it mean if the Americans would reduce their political, military leadership, whatever potential? What would that mean for the Europeans? Not something we choose, but something that would be imposed upon us, that would significantly change our security landscape and our capacity to act. So it's not a scenario I would like to discuss, but that might be a scenario we need to discuss. And if we hide away from it, we are certainly not better off. So I would be interested in rather short answers from all of you. And I would start with you, Julian, by asking a second question personally for you, which is, you gave us this wonderful 16-point list. How likely do you think are these 16 points to be implemented? So how big is the likeliness that those 16 things will happen on a scale from 1 to 10?
At the moment? In Europe?
I give you 10 more years. So now,
10 more years.
Say 5.
I'd say 50%.
Oh.
But yeah, because the world is getting dangerous out there. And even European leaders are beginning to realize that. I mean, every year, and I've had the honor of coming to this magnificent conference for many years, I write a piece after it called the Riga test. Are the people of Riga more secure this year than they were last year? And my sense is, on balance, they are about the same. But your point about President Trump is a sound one. I think a lot of Europeans hide behind the theatre that is President Trump from the harsh strategic realities the United States faces. But at the same time, I also accept Ben's point. You judge Americans by their deeds, and they understand that they need allies more than they've ever needed allies. But they need allies who can bring something to the table. Now, I happen to believe that the West is less a place now, more of an idea, that countries like Japan and Australia are not separate entities. They're part of this global movement of liberal democracy and freedom, which ultimately will prevail together. But America's at its core. And if we value what we say we value, if you value the freedom which we take for granted in Europe, then we've got to support the Americans. And that means easing burdens by helping to keep them strong where they need to be strong. But first and foremost, that means Europeans being effective first responders in a crisis, and sustained first responders along all the list that I mentioned. Because the alternative is we do nothing. And there is some cataclysmic political act, which I don't think would happen, but in the United States, we lose American backing, and then we have the choice to live with a very high level of risk. And the question I would put to political leaders is this: are you willing to subject your citizens to the uncertainties of that very high level of risk, given the correlation of forces in Europe that would exist without the Americans? Because if you are, then good luck, because it will take many years to have a genuinely strategic, autonomous European capability to replace what the United States gives us.
But there might not be a choice. But I move over to Ben, so we still have some time for the audience.
So your question is, I was so enamored with what Julian was saying, I forget your question.
Great.
My question was more or less, we talk about that, I think if you talk about the future of NATO, in the end, what we need to talk about is the future of the transatlantic relationship. And I would like to be optimistic, but I think in the end, we really have a climate change here. So a long-term structural change, the value-based change, and that might lead us just in different direction.
So I think that the relationships between the United States, between Americans and Europeans is so deep and is so complex that I choose and feel very optimistic about it. Now, it can't be just left unattended, but the fact is our businesses, I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I don't know a single German who doesn't either have a degree from a school in America or sends their kids to school in America or doesn't vacation in America, and that their business is not tied to America and vice versa.
You meet some very strange Germans.
Maybe so. But my point is, America has 300 million people, not one. There are 300 million Americans. And the sense of the Congress right now is more positive towards Europe than I have ever seen. I've been a NATO soldier for 38 years. I was stationed in Europe 3 times. I've never seen the Congress more pro-Europe, more pro-NATO than it is right now. So now, as exactly as the former Latvian president said, it takes 2 to tango. I mean, this relationship has to be a relationship. And so I'm from Florida. I have 3 sisters. These are 3 very smart women, and they live in Florida and Georgia. And all 3 of them are wondering, every time I talk to them, they're like, what the hell is going on? Why are we spending all that money in Europe? So there's at least 150 million Americans that agree with the president. So this is not something new. So there is a perception that Europeans are not pulling their weight in general. Now, that's ill-informed when the president says 30,000 American soldiers are in Germany protecting Germany. That's a completely false narrative. They're there because America needs them there for power projection. But nonetheless, 150 million Americans tend to agree with him.
So a bit more encouraging, you a bit more warning, Minister.
Yeah, well, indeed, I am a fan of transatlantic relations, the same of NATO, the same of the EU, and well, already we had some bad aspects of transatlantic relations, some skepticism in Europe, Western Europe, not in the Eastern Europe, Germany, and etc. But also, on the other hand, both in all areas you mentioned, World Trade Organization, for example, climate change, let's say development issues. So the best results, both for the world and for the United States and for the European, were when Europe and United States were playing as allies. It was always. Unfortunately, we have now conflicts on several issues, but I very much believe that it should not be related to the defense. And already the General mentioned several aspects, that increase of finances, contributions from Europe, also in US, were during already the present administration. Then, of course, situation in our region, Americans sent during few weeks' time from Crimea, from aggression in Crimea, the COI level, companies level soldiers, increase of air police, and other issues. And really, I think that it's really an interest both of the United States to have the continuous, the closest allies, which are Europeans. The same for Europe. And from this point, a little bit, as the nostalgia remember, 2001, 11th of September. I lived in Geneva at this time, I was working for international organizations. There are worries in the United Nations that maybe it could possible that United States will be isolistically and will go itself actually to fight Afghanistan and terrorism. And it happened in contrary. So the first time the Article 5 was imposed. So really about the necessary to have allies. And speaking also about our region and assurances, April this year, the summit of 3 Baltic countries with President Trump. Also, we got all the assurances from the continuation of the presence of United States, and also, well, even new, of course, very specific areas of the assistance moving further. And last but not least, of course, we have, unfortunately, we don't have now on permanent basis American troops in Baltics, but at least 2/3 of the time they are in the exercises in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So really, I think that, well, American leadership will be here, will continue. On the other hand, of course, Europeans need to put also its share.
Okay.
A brief comment?
You say, but after my statement, I am very optimistic. I am very optimistic because I am a young politician. But really, you ask about this relationship, and we are looking for this a little more talk about relationships between Europe, our Baltic states, and US. But we have relationships and transatlantic link with Canada, who at the moment play a much stronger role in world leadership. And this is same transatlantic. And we are adopted and CETA is a Canada-European trading agreement, which all Europe agrees that. And we saw that, and if I'm looking a little bit back, because we are talking about 100 years, and Americans help us establish Latvia, together fight with our soldiers about our independence. And we saw that, and this is why I'm very optimistic, because we share the same values, what I say in my statement. And I saw that, and I feel that when I met my soldiers, Latvian soldiers, when served together with allies and our partners, soldiers in different places in the world.
Thank you. I would like to open the debate. I'm trying to see everybody. If I don't react, that's not out of bad habit, it's just because I'm not always multitasking. Let me start with the lady over there, please, on the right. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your discussion. My name is Anna Udra, I'm from Latvia. I'm Latvia's Strat contributor at Center for European Policy Analysis. The first question I have is for both ministers. Do you think that NATO member countries are cooperating enough regarding cybersecurity, and if not, how could that be improved? And also, do you think that NATO could cooperate more with European Union regarding cybersecurity? And the second question, if I may, is to Mr. Ben Hodges. We see Germany moving forward with Nord Stream 2 project. Do you think that we can be sure that Germany has, and Western Europe as a whole, the same understanding of security issues as we do here in the Baltic states? Thank you.
Thank you.
Raymond, you're first, all right?
I try to collect some questions,
you collect
because
more.
we don't really have much time left, so I would like to give as many as possible of you the chance to speak. Then, and then over there. Please.
Thanks very much. Thanks to the panelists. My name is Iman Sliegis. I'm Latvia's ambassador in Paris. I want to focus on something that the moderator raised, and that's the question of European strategic autonomy, or as Julian said, European strategic autonomy of capabilities. So my first rhetorical question, I don't expect an answer, is did they jump or were they pushed on European strategic autonomy? But the more serious question is it needed? Julian mentioned that it might not happen in the next few years. But the other part of the question is, do any of the current initiatives taking place in Europe, such as the European intervention initiative, which involves 9 European countries, or the 34 PESCO initiatives, are they contributing to this autonomy, strategic autonomy? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Commander Engelen. I'm at the Strategy Department of the Belgian Defense Staff and also a lecturer in international politics here in Riga at the Graduate School of Law. You will not reach military mobility if you do not involve communication and transport ministries. You will not fight cybersecurity if you don't have Ministry of Communication and the operators around the table. I've not seen so far a North Atlantic Council meeting in the format of ministers of communication. But interestingly, Julian, you added knowledge as one of the fields of the future physiognomy of war. And knowledge actually feeds innovation, and knowledge is also an offspring of that innovation. So how likely is it that we will convince our ministers of education to ban students coming from countries that we know are going to be our adversaries in the future, from physics departments, chemistry departments, and research centers? Because I don't mind to see these students from these countries coming to our music conservatoires or to our faculties of philosophy. But I'm really concerned when I see them in big numbers in our technology departments.
Thank you. I will take some more and then hand over. Let me allow that statement. I would really like to encourage the female participants to ask more questions. So please raise your hands to make it a bit more diverse and lively debate. Still, please.
Thank you. 2 very short comments. One on European strategic autonomy. I would say that those people who propose that should put their money where their mouth is. I don't see the money coming online. Ben, good to have you here. A comment is about your statement that you have never seen US Congress so supportive of Europe and NATO, ever. Well, that's because the president is not. That's very simple. And it's good that Congress is. And Ben, my question is for you. Do you think, or do you consider that EFP is ready? You know, talk about mobility, railways and so forth. But, you know, why don't we move some of this additional MLRS capability actually to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, maybe Poland also, in order to complement the existing battle groups?
Thank you.
My name's Chris, from Riga Graduate School of Law as well. I have a question. How would you see for all of the panelists the possible 5 to 10 year NATO cooperation with Georgia and Ukraine? Whilst we see with Georgia it's more or less stable, but with Ukraine, with possible next 2 or 3 election cycles, you do not really know what you're going to get, and how would you see it developing in the future for all of the panelists, if you have any opinions on that? Thank you.
Thank you. I saw someone there in the middle of the, totally in the middle, I guess, yeah.
My name is Sabrina Scher from the German Foreign Office, and we have been talking today a lot about the transatlantic relationship as well, and we've been advised to judge America by its deeds, not by the words. And I see a lot of discussions coming up inside America about the world, about the position it aspires to occupy in the world, namely the old debate of retrenchment, restraint coming back. And judging America by its deeds, I wonder what happens in a scenario where America actually wants to cut back on its engagement with the world, and therefore needs a reduced role for its engagement. I know it's a hypothetical question, but still.
I have Hans, and I have two more. I would like you to ask to be very, very brief, so our panelists still have a chance to answer. Hans, you're here in... And then we walk our way there, and we...
Hans Benendijk from Washington. I wanted to address that last question and your question too. Ben made a great case that we ought to focus on what the United States is doing and not what it's saying. But what it's saying from the top is having consequences. And those consequences are not good. Confidence in the United States is at about 20% in the average European country. And I just wanted to caution here that Europe should not overreact. If it overreacts, start talking about strategic autonomy, Plan B, there is a risk that that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think we are in potential danger here if there's an overreaction. Ben is absolutely right. There's a lot of support for NATO in Washington, but that can change if Europe starts challenging American values and American commitments rather than American policies, which it traditionally does. So that's kind of a cautionary note. I have a 10-second question to Ben. The United States in the next 3 or 4 months is going to be making a decision on whether we forward deploy more troops to Poland. It seems to me that that is an opportunity to think more broadly about American boots on the ground in the Baltic states as well. I personally would like to see more American boots on the ground here. We have ambassadors, we have some modest deployment. How can we take this opportunity that the Polish government has given us, in a sense, to now broaden that deployment and make it a regional, not just a Polish deployment?
Thank you. I saw 3 people, and now that must be really very, very brief questions. Otherwise, we don't get any answers, and we would go very hungry into the coffee break. I don't want that. So, please, a very brief question.
Thank you very much. Starting from 2001, as an organizing Armenian Atlantic Association, I've been visiting many times to NATO headquarters, and they've been teaching me what about NATO, how NATO transformed and everything. One thing that has been always presented to me has been like one of the General Secretary has said that NATO is for keeping America in, Russia out, Germany down. It has been 70 years ago. Now we're talking what will be 100 years from now on. What do you think? Where this wording would be changed? Because today I first time heard even a request from a representative of another NATO country for Germany become much active, not anymore be down. And if this transformation would continue, also there is going to be much more political component in NATO driving force or military? Because NATO in any way is the country of shared values, but a lot of problems also exist in the NATO own countries, like with the EU specifically in the relationship. Cyprus occupation done by the NATO country.
Thank you. I have a last one. I saw a last one over there. Oh. There, and then it's really over. We started late, we can run a little bit over, but I don't want to rush the panelists too much. Please, please be brief. Or whoever gets the micro first.
Thank you. Amy Finney from the UK. Mr. Bergmanis, you mentioned the need to defend all arms of society, so economic, civil, military, political. As a military alliance, what do you see NATO being able to do in that space? So should they be coordinating this effort, or should they be supporting national government, the EU, other organisations in that effort? Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. At the right, and the back at the right side.
Thank you very much. Oleg Shlomo, Embassy of Belarus. Just very short questions. How many NATO troops and arms and forces and planes and so on are needed in Eastern and Central European countries for them finally to relax and say, oh, we have a wall that nobody could break? And would there be any ceiling for national budgets, military budgets? Is the military build-up the only way to avoid war in the near future? And how can you assure your societies that another rocket is not launched accidentally somewhere in your country? And the last question, if not Russia, what would be the raison d'être for NATO? For NATO, what are modern threats and challenges alliance could meet to prove its relevance? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't expect you, dear panelists, to answer all questions. You pick and choose whatever you want. I think there are some clusters that came up. EFP, military mobility, Germany, cyber, to just throw some at you. I was just thinking, hearing the questions, if I were a southern NATO ally, I might wonder whether this is my alliance. Maybe you want to take up that last idea too. Given that, that it's a bit tight on the time front, I would appreciate ever so much if you could be sharp and brief, frank, and controversial if you want. All that in the same time.
I can start.
No Minister, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's very short. Because it's one of the questions who is particularly asked for Baltics cooperation in cyber security. I think it's very well because in Estonia is established its NATO cybersecurity excellence centers, and we are works very close. And when Estonia was a presidency country of European Council, first time organizing real exercise for ministers, what we do with cyber attack. This is a very great opportunity, and I think this is how see Europeans cooperation with NATO. And I remember we have signed a big agreement and how we are cooperated with the EU. And always in our ministerially participated Ms. Mogherini and Mr. Stoltenberg, always in the European Union. And this is how we see and how close we are cooperating. And always we are talking about much more we'll do, but at the moment I think it's great. And I know it's Lithuania have an idea how it's improved that situation. And you are asked about what I say about comprehensive security system building in Latvia. NATO absolutely helps. And one of the main targets at the moment goes and talk with each NATO member about state resilience. And this is how we see state resilience. And helps for us talk internal with other ministry. Absolutely, it's great because it's much better understood what's needed if our state resilience build up. About Ukraine and Georgia, of course, we always support them. And I know in next week we will be in NATO ministerial in Brussels, and one of the part of our discussion again is together NATO with Georgia. And we sent and helps build up new forces in Ukraine, and we helps for Georgia. And I think it's Lithuania do unbelievable great work in Ukraine and in different ways. But one of the lesson learned, what's need take for Ukraine is absolutely more usage and experience what really happens at the moment and how see situation Ukrainians. And I want to say thanks Ukrainians because protect Europe, absolutely. And last one is how it's a good question about transport ministry and communication ministry, communication with us. I had a meeting with my Minister of Communication and Transports very firstly. And I talked with them how we use European funds for improving what's mentioned. We are talking these panels, our infrastructures, seaports, railway, roads, and I heard, I don't know, will be or not. It's a common European Union defense minister and transport minister meeting in the future. And we talk about this mobility issue. And I absolutely agree what to ask the gentleman from Belgium. How I see it's a lot of times says that in Latvia is how is one of the biggest mistakes what's do Latvia. It's a cancel a test of physics in a secondary schools. I think this is one of the big strategic mistakes in Latvia. And for us, need absolutely that. It's a more concentrated for that direction. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I will try to cover several questions through the aspect of the European defense and security policy. Actually, I don't believe with this term of strategic autonomy, and Lithuania was always more skeptical together with Brits was about the European defense policy, but nowadays, well, in our view, we need to support all the European initiatives which facilitates the increase of financements of defense of European countries and also of capabilities of European countries. And this is the basics, of course, providing that it's going with complementarity, but not contradiction with NATO. And more concretely, I think that it is possible, I believe that it's possible to use the European Union's mechanisms, for example, military mobility. So it's necessary for defense, it's necessary for NATO, but the best probably platform is the EU mechanism, for example, with directives, with regulations, which is mandatory approach. In addition to that, of course, Europe has transport financial instrument, and really I know that DG Transport of the EU is really working intensively with NATO regarding the standards, and this will be, we believe, one of the directions, infrastructure of the EU. So really it is really very important. The same about the cyber. There are angles, of course, of the military aspects, there are civilian aspects, and it's difficult to separate. Of course, both EU and NATO is strengthening these capabilities. But so, for example, we are leading one of the PESCO projects, which is about the mutual assistance on cyber issue and the rapid response for cyber, and the work is going quite well, and we expect that at the middle of the next year it will be functional, and it also will add to security, including through the NATO standards. The question was about ministers of communication, but also it could be covered both by NATO, but the mechanism probably best is through EU. So really, and transport, also other connections. So I think that we need to not duplicate, but all to maximum level exploit these possibilities. Regarding Germany and German leadership, and here I also would like to say, yes, sometimes I'm not happy when in particular leaders of social democratic flank is saying that, well, Germany is preparing to take the leadership in all areas except defense. But my question, if leadership for defense is working in Lithuania perfectly, so as the general said, it was the first, why not in Europe? And really it's time to read out with those complexes from the Second World War. Second World War is over already 70 years old, and really we would like more troops, of course, but we understand also political views in NATO, so Russia, of course, really positions, and the question is, if we don't have enough troops, the question how quickly we would get support. And really here I would like to thank General Hodges, who did personally actually on this issue. 20% support for the US in average in Europe. Actually in Lithuania it's 80%. Poland the same. Please come with the troops and with all the investments and other, and really so you will get the perfect conditions. And really once more I think that it's transatlantic solidarity and US presence in Europe in general, it's must. Georgia, Ukraine, yes, we would like more. We would like quicker results, closer to NATO. But on the other hand, we also understand the present situation. And in our view, we need to do everything to use the present mechanisms including preparation both for armed forces, for example, of Georgia and Ukraine to adopt the NATO standards. And really, we very much understand that Georgia, and in particular Ukraine, is really defending the southeastern flank of NATO. It's without any doubts. And we need to provide continuous support, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. I'm being kindly reminded by the organizers that we have totally overrun the allocated time frame. But I think it would be very unelegant to not give you the last chance to say something. So I count on you, two very experienced panelists, to give us each two last sentences we will keep in mind for the rest of the conference.
Well, you're the one that took 20 freaking questions, Claudia. I mean. All right, EFP. These are not little islands. These are multinational battle groups that were designed in the concept to have real warfighting capability. They have artillery, armor, engineers, all the things you need, and each of them are integrated into the host nation brigade. So that great German battle group with all their Leopards are part of the Iron Wolf Brigade in Lithuania. This is a serious warfighting formation. And the decision by Denmark to offer a division headquarters so that you've now got a 2-star headquarters over the brigades in Estonia and Latvia, and then a Polish division headquarters, multinational division, over the Lithuanian and Polish battle groups. This is a serious effort, and another example of Polish leadership. For sure, that's, as Minister Macierewicz said earlier, this is a step. There's more that needs to be done. I think converting air policing to air defense would be a big step, and the allies bringing forward some artillery, I'm all for that. Georgia, Ukraine. Georgia should be in the alliance right now. We should quit goofing around. Georgia has nothing left to prove. Russia is never going to leave that 20% that they occupied, even though 10 years ago they said they would after the so-called Sarkozy agreement. As Bismarck said, no treaty with Russia is worth the paper it's written on. So we need to go ahead and accept that they're going to be there just the way we let West Germany. We brought West Germany into the alliance, even though there were 1 million Soviet troops sitting in East Germany. We need to go ahead and do it. And when this big port, the deep water port of Anaklia, is completed in Georgia, that's going to change all the east-west commerce, and everybody in Europe is going to have a stake in the security of Georgia, because the economic codependence actually will increase their security, and we should quit letting Russia veto Georgia joining the alliance. I would recommend putting rotational troops there from the U.S., just like we have in other countries. Ukraine, U.S., and Canada, UK, Poland, and I believe Lithuania are providing excellent training mission right now there for helping Ukrainians. We're learning so much from them, and the decision to give them Javelin is going to give them a lot more confidence. However, the OSCE has got to be allowed to do their job. There are Ukrainian soldiers getting killed every single week, years after the so-called ceasefire was agreed to by everybody. Russia wants to be respected. They need to allow OSCE to do their job, and then I think we can actually start making some progress. Bases in Poland, no better ally than Poland, incredible soldiers. Poland has done everything you could ask an ally to do. Modernization, they're ready. Quality equipment, modernization effort. But the cohesion of the alliance is the most important thing. The cohesion of the alliance is what guarantees security for all of us. So I would be against anything that erodes the cohesion of the alliance. There is no doubt that Russia will respond, probably by putting troops in Belarus, or maybe some other response. It'll be serious. And so I would be against a bilateral decision by the United States to do this. If the United States, and the burden is on us, not Poland, if the United States is willing to do the diplomatic work necessary to bring along the allies, so that all the allies agree that yes, Russia will respond, but we're with you, this is a good thing, then I'm all for it. Polish soldiers, it's a great host. They've done everything you could ask for host nation support, but all of our allies will have to deal with the consequences of the Russian response, whether it's a bilateral or a multilateral decision. So that's why I think it's so important that we do this by bringing the alliance along. The United States is never leaving NATO. Write it down. The United States is never leaving NATO. Our alliance has survived. The French, the reason the headquarters of SHAPE is in Mons, Belgium, is because the French kicked us all out. Right? But we have, and now they're back in with 2 4-stars. I don't know how they pull that off, but anyway, the the alliance has been through a lot of difficult times. I was a lieutenant in Germany, and there were hundreds of thousands of Germans protesting against Pershing II deployment. But it was the courage of Chancellor Kohl that told Gorbachev that it was over. So we'll get through this.
Thank you.
Very quickly. Very well said, Ben. Right. Immens, Kurt and Hans, quickly. Immens, your question really is about the relationship between coalitions and which institutions we invest military power in. If I was blunt about the real vehicle for European strategic autonomy right now, it's the European Intervention Initiative. Why? Because it's built on the Franco-British Strategic Defence Partnership, which will survive irrespective of Brexit. The Lancaster House Agreement of 2010. That's where the real military development is taking place, combined joint expeditionary forces. So if Europeans do not invest in institutions, then the bigger powers will step outside those institutions to make coalitions work. And in the end, coalitions kill alliances, and that should be considered. Kurt, don't see any chance of your ministers banning students from China and elsewhere in your universities. But what I meant was we do much more with our education, defence education resources to really create a mission command culture in Europe where we empower our officers from lowest level to the highest level. I mean, it's always been amazing to me that, and Ben, you can answer this at some point, mate, that when they get 4 stars on their shoulders, they suddenly think they become strategic experts. I'd love, for example, to have defence education doing strategic training for senior officers to understand the political strategic context in which that takes place. And finally, Hans, it's time, mate. I mean, it's simply time. I mean, I was hearing Madeleine Albright's 3 Ds in what you were saying. But, you know, World War II is over. The Cold War is over. It's time we Europeans grew up. And Americans should see that as a really important contribution to your security defence and take it as a thank you. Not be worried about it, because it's time that we Europeans got serious.
That's a wonderful conclusion of this panel. We managed to talk about Bismarck in a panel about NATO, which is quite a challenge. Thank you, Ben, for that one. Particularly, thank you for making us still love, even if it's a very serious topic. Thank you for the terrific contributions. My sincere apologies for all those who I didn't manage to give a chance to talk. I'm really sorry for that. But particularly, please join me in thanking the panelists for giving so much insight.